This is Jay Kanzler. It's KTRS, the Big 550, 910, filling in for McGraw Millhaven. Joined right now by Steven LaChance, best-selling nonfiction and fiction author. His new book on the 1949 St. Louis exorcism case, Confrontation with Evil, is now out. Good to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
This is something that it fascinates, obviously, everybody in St. Louis. The 1949 exorcism was kind of at the heart of the story, The Exorcist. Is that correct?
That's correct. You can't grow up in this city without hearing the story and becoming kind of a part of your history of the city. And I think that's part of the interesting things about it. It is part of the inspiration of what inspired the blockbuster film and the book as well.
Well, let's talk about a couple of things. First of all, the book. Okay,
Sure.
It's available. I'm reading just from the cover, an in-depth review of the 1949 possession that inspired The Exorcist. So tell us, for that one listener out there that doesn't remember the story, give us an idea of what that 1949 possession was.
Well, it was a young boy from Cottage City, Maryland, 13 years old, who was working with the Ouija board with his spiritualist aunt. That's how things started. Shortly after that, things began to happen. The aunt dies, and then he goes under these different kind of paranormal events that were going on. Like his bed was shaking, they would hear scratching noises, the sound of marching feet going up and down his bed. And this kind of went on until he actually started to form words on his body.
Wow.
When they would ask questions, you know, and that's how, by the way, that's how they brought him to St. Louis. The mother had family in St. Louis, and they saw the word Louis form on his body, and she assumed that this is where she needed to bring him. Now, interestingly enough, a lot of people think, well, he came here for an exorcism. It's not true. They did not bring him here for an exorcist. As a matter of fact, the first person they saw when they got to St. Louis was a spiritualist.
Really?
Yeah.
How did they end up with, it was a priest here in St. Louis. How did they end up with a priest performing an exorcism?
Well, what was really interesting is a cousin was watching the events as it happened, and by this time you have things flying across the room, you have the words forming, all right, all that kind of thing going on. So she goes, because she's going to St. Louis University, and she realizes my cousin needs some type of help, you know, and they're not getting him the right kind of help. So she goes to talk to Father Bishop, who, by the way, we use his diary for a lot of the stuff that we do in the book. Which he wrote a diary of the whole thing. Well, anyway, he was her professor at St. Louis University. She goes to him and says, I need help. And this is why. And he goes and gets permission, and he was the first person to go, sees what's going on in the house, which there was all kinds of things happening. I don't want to give it all away for everybody, but and then he goes back and says, well, I need help here. And that's when they brought in Father Bowdern, who was the pastor of St. Xavier College Church up on Lindell.
Right.
And they
spent many hours there.
Yeah, and they brought him in to do the exorcism. And he was the exorcist.
Yeah. So your book, what do you bring to this story in terms of informing the reader?
Lots of things. Lots of things. There's a lot of things that were overlooked.
Right.
You know, oftentimes it's a very human story. Very human things with very human emotions. The best of humanity and the worst of humanity happens. One of the things is the mother, you know, has always been portrayed as kind of the victim. Anytime you've seen the film or any of the documentaries or anything on this, the mother's always, in truth of the matter is when she starts questioning the demon, and the welts are coming out on the boy, the words, and he's screaming in pain and stuff, she keeps asking. And to come to find out, when they get to St. Louis and Father Bishop goes to the house and starts asking questions and watching things, the family's standing around the boy and the mother's asking, where's the dead aunt's money buried? It was money motivated.
Really?
Yeah. Greed, now keep in mind, in these type things, greed is the worst of all sin. Greed leads into all other sin. As a matter of fact, when people do this work, they go in and help people like this or priests, they will not accept payment. As a matter of fact, I was at one event where I actually saw a priest tear up a check. It's just not something that is done because you can't let greed get involved. In this case was definitely the hook was greed, and it pulled it right through.
And the greed being the mother was looking for money?
She was looking for money that the dead aunt had buried.
Wow.
Interesting, huh?
Right.
And that's always kind of been overlooked. Now, it's in Father Bishop's diary, which let's talk about that for a second.
How did you come upon Father Bishop?
Anybody can get it,
Really?
by the way. Yeah, it's out there for anybody to read. It's like in the public realm now. So, but what was interesting about it is that he wrote this diary as an internal document for the church. It was never supposed to be made public. As a matter of fact, it was found years later, and then it was made public. As a matter of fact, Thomas Allen, who did it, another good book, he used the diary as well. But no one has ever really tackled this, and it's in the diary. And I think the diary, because it was an internal document and it wasn't meant for public consumption, makes it probably the best historical proof that we got of what happened in those moments. And it talks about the mother and her involvement. And it's always kind of been overlooked, and I kind of have to wonder why.
Right. You know, for some people, they hear the things that you describe, and they might think, that didn't really happen. That's Hollywood.
Sure.
What makes you believe that the events as described in your book and you know portrayed in the movie are factually based?
Well, first of all, let's start with the movie. The movie's over-dramatized by far. I mean, the pea soup and the spinning head. No, that didn't happen. But what you have is you have an event that 48 people, over 48 witnesses witnessed at different points. So that's interesting, number one. Number two, if it walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's a duck.
Right.
I mean, this follows a certain amount of things. Now, mind you, this boy grows up to work for NASA. You know, the events start and then they stop at a certain point. It wasn't very long, it was about 3.5 months. He stopped the day after Easter, by the way. So it's interesting that he worked for NASA, so there isn't any type of mental illness. But for those that don't believe in the paranormal or the demonic or anything like that, let me put it to you this way. It really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter because whatever happened to this boy was very real to him.
Sure.
And that's what matters. And the fact that you had this priest who at one point lost 75 pounds doing this exorcism, between 35 and 75, had oozing boils all over his body during this event. You know, the fact that he was able to do this for this boy and give his all to do it is pretty amazing story. And something that St. Louis should be kind of proud of, I would think.
So let's talk about you, Steven A. LaChance. Your book, Confrontation with Evil, an in-depth review of the 1949 possession that inspired The Exorcist. Why are you writing about this now? What interest do you have in these events and the paranormal?
Well, I started into the paranormal in 2001 when I moved into a house in Union, Missouri.
My dad grew up there.
Well, yeah, I grew up in Washington.
Okay.
They call it. I don't know why we label houses like the Amityville house, and this was the Union Screaming house. But I moved into a haunted house with 3 kids, and we went through an event. So I went looking for answers. You know, why did this happen? How did this happen? You know, explain this to me, and that started me down this path. And then when people started hearing that I had been through it. People started coming for help, that sort of thing. So you got to figure out how to do this, right? And it was some of the cases that I looked at were some of the most prolific cases because I felt like, you know, if you're a St. Louisan and you grew up here, which I did till I was 12, and you think, okay, there's 2 places, the Lemp Mansion,
right?
Okay, which I went to, and then the Exorcist case. If you want to go looking for answers, it seemed to me go to the places that supposedly produce this stuff. That's how.
Describe a little bit about those events at the Union Screaming House, that house. What happened there?
Well, shortly after moving in, things started happening to the children. You know, things moving around. At one point, I had all 3 kids sleeping in bed with me. You know, and I was
not getting much sleep, I suppose.
No. And I'm thinking, what did I do wrong? You know. And then the youngest son, every time he was out of reach, I would find him shaking and screaming.
Wow.
You know,
scary.
Scared.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like nothing I had ever seen before. And I was trying to figure it out. I really couldn't figure out what was going on. I thought maybe the move was too much for them. Maybe it didn't meet up to their expectations, something. Paranormal wasn't on the list until one night when I was a corporate trainer at the time, and I was getting ready to leave to go out of town, and I was sitting in the living room to play a game with the kids, and I looked up in the kitchen doorway, and there stood a smoky black figure of a man.
Really?
And that was the first time I saw it. And I looked down, and I thought, well, when I look back up, this thing's going to go away. And when I looked back up, it was still there, and it moved into the family room in front of me, and it kind of dissipated away. Now, at that moment, I thought, well, like anyone else, okay, I got to get out of here. But I didn't want to be like the people in the movies go, I wanted to do it with a little bit of decorum, right? So my daughter says my hand was shaking as I'm trying to get them to the door and not tell them that I've just seen a ghost. So we get to the door, and it was an old door. You had to put the key in the outside, turn the key. When I did that, the house started screaming from the inside. It was a man screaming.
Oh.
Think of somebody being murdered, beaten, dogs barking in the neighborhood. The kids are hearing it. All decorum went out the window.
I was going to say, I'd have lost all dignity at
all
that point.
All dignity gone. We were on the run.
Oh, that's amazing. Do people ever doubt you? Do they say, you got to screw loose?
No, well, I think, of course. I mean, you're always going to get that because understanding is what comes from experience. And for people like that, I always tell them, I don't have the answers. I can't tell you what these things are and how they happen, but I could just give you my experience. And someday you might have your experience, and if you do, I'm probably the guy you're going to come to for help.
Do you have time to stick around for the next break? Maybe take a couple of phone calls, talk to other people's about their paranormal experiences?
Absolutely.
It is 9:21. We're talking with Steven LaChance, his book, Confrontation with Evil. He's going to stay with us. We'll take your phone calls at 969-5877 or 888-550-5877. We'll be right back after this.